When leaders announce a pause in fighting, the headline often declares a military stalemate or indecision on the battlefield. But what looks like hesitation to an observer might actually be a calculated strategic pivot. Moscow has shifted from rapid territorial conquest to a grinding war of attrition, betting that time itself is their most valuable asset rather than speed. This is not about tanks moving slowly because they are stuck. It is a high-risk economic and demographic strategy designed to outlast the West by bleeding Ukraine dry over years. The stakes involve a human cost that would shock any democracy, yet Moscow views these losses as an acceptable tax for long-term geopolitical leverage. To understand why this pause matters, we must first confront the sheer scale of the sacrifice being made on the Russian side. Since February 2022, estimates suggest Russia has incurred approximately 1.2 million total casualties, including killed, wounded, and missing soldiers. Of those figures, roughly 325,000 confirmed deaths have been sustained by the armed forces in action since the invasion began. To put this into perspective for a curious viewer familiar with American history, these numbers represent 4 times the United States combat death toll across World War II, Korea, and Vietnam combined. In most political systems, such a loss of life would trigger an immediate demand for peace or regime change. Yet in Moscow's calculus, these casualties are not signs of failure but rather evidence that they have successfully absorbed a shock that was meant to collapse their economy and morale. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. This brings us to the core strategic pivot, the transition from conquest to attrition. In late 2024 and early 2025, Russian command abandoned the blitzkrieg model that relied on capturing cities through speed and regime change via surprise. Instead, they adopted a strategy of destabilization through endurance. The goal is no longer to win in one decisive battle, but to force Ukraine into a permanent state of weakness regardless of who wins specific skirmishes. This shift explains why recent data shows advances averaging only 70 meters per day during offensives like the push toward Pokrovsk. That pace is slower than many battles from World War I, yet it serves a deliberate purpose. By moving slowly, Russia maintains constant pressure without overextending its supply lines or risking total logistical paralysis again. They are effectively turning Ukraine into a permanent security threat on Europe's border, ensuring that even if they do not capture Kiev, the state remains destabilized and divided indefinitely. The logic behind this grinding pace relies heavily on a specific economic gamble. Can Russia survive longer than its Western supporters? By mid-2026, Moscow is accepting an economy shrinking at home while fighting abroad, with projected growth rates hovering around 0.6% for 2025 amidst severe war strains. This is not the robust expansion of a peacetime power, but the controlled collapse of a nation willing to trade economic health for geopolitical leverage. The Kremlin believes that its authoritarian control allows it to absorb this pain better than Ukraine or NATO can sustain political will over multiple election cycles and years of inflation. They are betting on Western fatigue, hoping that democratic allies will fracture under the weight of long-term aid commitments before their own demographics collapse completely. It is a race where Moscow thinks they have more time because their system does not require public consensus to continue fighting. This strategic reality explains why diplomatic breakthroughs remain elusive in 2026. Negotiations, including high-level summits like the one between President Trump and Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, failed because Moscow refuses to negotiate unless it can force regime change or total neutrality for Kyiv. When quick victory became impossible after early failures, the Kremlin decided that a forever war is a viable alternative if peace terms are not favorable today. They view time as their only remaining strategic asset, hoping that by simply continuing at this slow pace, they will eventually outlast the political stamina of those funding Ukraine's defense. The lack of new territorial gains is therefore not a bug in their operation. It is a feature of a strategy designed to drain resources rather than seize land quickly. For the viewer following global power dynamics, this signals a shift from episodic conflicts to sustained, low-intensity warfare that tests national endurance over decades. The West is no longer fighting for a quick victory but managing a long-term drain on its own alliances and budget. However, there are limits to this strategy. The war will likely continue at this grinding pace until one of three catastrophic outcomes occurs: total Russian economic failure, a decisive political shift in Western aid that cuts off resources entirely, or a demographic crisis within Russia itself, where the population base collapses under the weight of mobilization and casualties. Currently, Moscow believes it can survive the pain longer than its opponents can sustain the will to fight. The question for 2026 is whether this calculation holds up when faced with an opponent that refuses to yield or a Western public that finally decides the cost has become too high. If time truly favors Moscow, then every day of stalling brings them closer to their strategic goal. But if the demographic clock runs out before they achieve it, the entire strategy could unravel in favor of Ukraine's resilience and its international partners. The war is not about who captures more ground today. It is about which side can survive the longest without breaking under the weight of their own choices. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.